At the time of doing this, obviously, it will have been past Liberation Day. We probably know what's happening on the world stage, but I dread to think. I dread to think. Could be fun. Could be fun indeed. Anyway, yeah, let's get back to this. So I have said for a lot of times that in the Conservative Party, there is this real fight for the direction that he's going in. And to be honest, at the moment, under Kimmy Badenoch, under Robert Jerrick, again, the supposed, the next, very likely leader of the Conservative Party, they're taking it in an ever more rightward direction. And the One Nation Conservative group, which are like the conservative centrists who like to style themselves as realists, pragmatists, compassionate conservatives. They are aghast at what has been going on in their party. And they are a very large part of the Conservative Party, even though the rest of the Conservative Party hates them, calls them wets, and despises them, and says that they should all be kicked out and booted out of the party. Meanwhile, that's like the core support of the Conservatives. And what has happened to that core support? Well, it's either A, not voted, resulting in that missing 10%, or they've gone and joined the Lib Dems. And for those that are left, I say to this you in seriousness, if you want your party back, you've got to go to war to get it back. Like, you have to go and fight full force to get your party back. And today, we are actually looking at one of those One Nationalists who's crying out, please don't go this way. But, stop chasing reform. He's crying out. And oh boy, we're going to read some of the comments as well. The Conservative Party is doomed. It is going off a cliff. And unless this guy decides, enough is enough and decides to fight, it's going to go careening off this cliff very quickly. So maybe we could see an interesting fight at the next, Conservative leadership debate over this. That'll be fascinating to see, because that's what should have happened last time. And that would have been very fun to see. But as always, before we go on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Of course, there is my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, 'twas Wednesday yesterday, where we did a wonderful little look at my April Fool's post and a bit of history behind all that. But as always, let's have a look at what's been going on Conservative Home. With actually the guy who's written this is actually the chair of the One Nation Conservative Network, a grassroots organization dedicated to advancing pragmatic and compassionate conservatism. Good luck with that. But again, fascinated to speak to Cody. Again, if you ever do see this, Cody, I would love to speak to you about the current state of the Conservative Party. It would be an interesting conversation to have. So if you do ever see this, do get in touch. I would love to have that conversation. But anyway, back to this. So the 2024 Conservative Party conference led to turbulence, with now numerous consequences, including a growing argument over the party's direction. I would say it's still there. That argument is still there, but there you go. The prevailing assumption in the room was that to fight the Reform Party, voters and, of course, reverse deflections, with the wipeout now of both Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly in now the favour of the perceived right-wing candidates, subsequently led to the collapse of the argument of the centre. I would argue this, that Tom Tugendhat, if you compare his 2024 run to the last time he ran, he was a lot more centrist. This time, he tried to flirt with this, like, I'm not going to be centrist, but I'm going to sort of move my position and take on some right wing stuff. I think if he'd stood his guns and went with the argument last time and re-advanced his argument saying, hey, look, I'm back. I told you the party needs to change. I'm here once again to offer you that change. If he had maybe gone with that argument again, he might have won. James cleverly went exactly the same route as Tom Tugendhat. It wasn't a very centrist argument, but there you go. Like I say, would be a good basis to have that conversation, though, Cody. Anyway, this, of course, is a mistake that damages both our electoral prospects and fails to recognise the clear weakness in conceding the home ground of the Conservative Party, which is, of course, he makes the case that the Conservative Party is a more should fight for the centrist ground. Again, he's not wrong on that. We've seen the polls many times, just how many centrists are out there. And I know it's a bit of a meme to say about, online about centrist, but in the UK, they are, believe it or not, one of the largest voting blocks out there, even bigger than the left and the right combined. So it's not wrong. But anyway, back to this. It is, of course, very easy to understand the argument for a shift to the right. 24% of the Conservative home defections from 2019 went to the Reform Party, while only 19% defected to the Liberal Democrats or even Labour. However, the largest number of defections did not necessarily reflect what of course is politically viable. Again, very true. I agree. There is a difference between what they say and what is actually politically viable. You are seeing this right now in America, where Trump promised like these mass deportation things, which is again what you're seeing Reform go in the direction of, and what many people want the Conservative Party to do. They are openly saying now that they cannot do it because it's against the law. It's against Constitution. They would have to wreck like the constitutionality, judges, everything to be able to perform that. And it would just not be worth doing it because it would do a lot of damage that they know that they wouldn't be able to undo. And they cannot, shall we say, fulfill that objective. So they're now trying to climb down on a lot of this deportation stuff. So the hardest pill, of course, for any Conservative Party to swallow might be that winning back the Reform voters isn't a fully achievable electoral outcome. Very true indeed. If you look at a lot of those Reform voters, they ain't coming back to the Conservative Party. They've said that very clearly in a lot of polls. So, what reason, of course, does someone who identifies with the ideological ideas of the right-wing populism have to rejoin the Conservative Party when they have exactly that, of course, the Reform Party? The old adage, vote Reform, get Labour, falls very short when the party itself is the dominant opposition now to Labour in the North. It's the old Coke argument. Why have Pepsi when you can drink Coke? You know, it really is. It really is, and I agree with him on that. Why is any Conservative going to come back? They're not. It's very valid indeed. Many, of course, may be tempted to argue that support for reform is, of course, very heavily dependent on the popularity of Nigel Farage. Again, I think you're right on that as well. So, to an extent, this is true. However, it is also important to remember that by late February of 2024, before the coronation of Farage as leader once more, a poll had already recorded Reform UK at 10%. This is the equivalent of a national party at the same level as the Liberal Democrats without its central populist leader. I do not think, that will be, I suppose, the forever question we're always asking. What would have happened had Farage never re-entered the fray, never come back to get involved in politics? Would they have had those electoral successes, or would they just be left maybe with Lee Anderson? Because I think Lee Anderson is itself a very interesting case of what happens when an MP goes back and sort of really focuses on his home constituency, as Lee Anderson did, and we talked about in the past. It would be interesting. Probably the forever great what if question. What would have happened? Who knows? Who knows? But even then, would they have been able to make the kind of successes that you saw the Liberal Democrats make at the 2024 general election? You know? But for young, of course, reform supporters, and of course, young people as well, the Conservative Party has been in power for essentially as long as they can remember. The record of the Conservative government since 2010 on the economy, public services, crime, corruption, and immigration will be forever be remembered. Furiously, of course, as a failure. Exasperated by social media, the damage is almost irrevocable. I would agree with you on that. I would very, very much agree with you on that. You were in power for a very long time, and a lot of people remember how bad your government was. That since the 2010s, you really didn't deliver on the economy. You didn't deliver on public services, crime, corruption. Corruption, absolutely, with what went on. Immigration, of course, there was no problem with immigration. The problem became you broke the immigration service. And then, of course, this had knock-on effects for other things as well, which then, has allowed reform to blame immigration for the state of the economy, public services, housing, etc. But the reality is, it's because you didn't solve those things to begin with. But, there we go. Big, conversation on that in itself. But I do think he's right about that. That failure will be remembered for a very long time indeed. So the old pillars of course, the unbreakable first past the post system have managed to keep third-party revolts in check. For example, UKIP and of course others. But by polarization and now the formation of a new electoral cleavages mean that there are now many seats that are no longer safe for either the Conservatives or Labour. This shift in the voter behaviour makes a win like in 2019 even ever unlikely to ever happen again. It was a voting coalition characterized by political and ideological contradictions. It was once a big tent, suddenly became very overcrowded. Yep, because a lot of these one nationalists at the 2019 thought, Boris simultaneously promoting global Britain and, leveling up, not going to work. But of course, he went on to win and won that big thing, and they didn't question it. They didn't question how it was massively big ideological contradictions. They didn't care because, Johnson has won this fantastic victory. Guess we've got to support him now. And they did until, of course, Boris started, screwing up quite significantly. And then, they didn't. So the question, of course, who should, of course, leave this tent has been answered for us. More right-leaning members might have liked to see the quote, "Let's the wets leave for the Liberal Democrats." And we've seen that many, many times on this site itself, argued both in articles like this and, of course, in the comments down below. And you're about to see those comments down below as well. So the more right-leaning members might have liked to see, quote, "the wets leave for Liberal Democrats," but instead, it is they who have left to join Reform, leaving us as a centre-oriented party. You are not a centre-oriented party at all at the moment. That would be very interesting to see you try and explain that, but there you go. Hence, of course, the argument now to be focusing on a centre-right party and trying to appeal to Labour and Liberal Democrat voters comes into play. So let's make a case for it. Let's see if they can actually rebuild that partly of that, coalition. Might be to begin with to actually have, good policy that you go on and, actually do. So, firstly, you look at the recent local elections. In Tiptree, the by-election on the 20th of February, the Conservative councillor, Will Calverley, won by a 10.8% gain. Reform made a 10% gain, and most importantly, Labour suffered a 15% loss. These losses did not, of course, drastically shift to any other parties, as both the Greens and the Liberal Democrats have also saw decreases. In the Abbots Langley, the Bedmouth by-election, the Conservative Party won by 40%, and the Liberal Democrats and Reform entered the scene for the very first time with just 13% of the vote. Again, it will depend on area by area. I think the upcoming local elections are going to be interesting. I think the upcoming local elections are going to be very interesting, but we'll have to see on that, a lot of that. So, secondly, reform does not represent our values of the Conservative Party. We take pride in fiscal prudence, yet, as David Gauck has highlighted in previous articles, the ISF found that Reform's 2024 manifesto was riddled with inaccuracies and figures that simply did not add up. Yep, as people continually point out, if Reform ever came into government, oh boy, would they be bad. So, during, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, the Rishi furlough scheme was, of course, widely considered a success in reducing redundancy. This outcome, however, is unlikely to have been ever achieved under a reform-led policy. According to YouGov, polling at least in July of 2024, 24% of reform voters were opposed to redistributing income from the better off to those less well off, compared to the 33% who believed the government should redistribute income. Like I say, Sunak proved socialism worked. And that pissed off a lot of people in the party. That was for sure. If you remember back that far, we were talking about that. Furthermore, of course, according to a YouGov polling back in 2024, approximately 52% of Reform respondents either denied that human activity was responsible for climate change or outright rejected the existence of climate change altogether. What happened to Kimmy Badenoch when she said that as well? You know, are you going to ignore that your leader is reversing on that? While the Conservative Party continues now to currently debate the path to tackling climate change, even Kimmy Badenoch recognizes the necessity of addressing it. While we are the party that legislated the Environmental Act, it has now led to numerous projects to promote sustainable energy. But Kimmy Badenoch, in her address, said, too expensive, can't do it. What's the point of spending all this money on all this green stuff? It is a complete rejection of that. So I think he's deluded maybe about what Kimmy Badenoch says about the environment, especially given her recent speech on the subject. In the aftermath of Brexit, whether you supported it or not, we as Conservatives will always take a pragmatic approach to this country's relationship with Europe. Can you imagine Nigel Farage going to Brussels to try and secure a free, fair trade deal? It is unlikely, as he would be very much constrained by his Eurosceptic base. What about your own Eurosceptic base and the problems that Brexit your own created? Are you not going to maybe address all that either as well, and the problems that Brexit has created in this country? I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sooner or later, the Conservative Party will have to address Brexit. That will be very interesting when that comes up. That's for certain. Meanwhile, when it comes to the European Court of Human Rights, there is now a growing consensus that it has overstepped its original mandate. No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't overstepped its original mandate. That is ridiculous on that front. As Conservatives, we should be supporting Tom Tugendhat's sensible call for reforming the European Court of Human Rights, rather than resorting to the absolutist stance of leaving it outright. Would you gain traction now with the rest of Europe for wanting to reform the court? Maybe, depending what reforms you go after. Like I say, I think going after the European Court of Human Rights, bad idea. Bad idea to begin with. You should not be touching it with a barge pole. Given the fact, is what you've seen, they are replaying all those classic Brexit hits with the European Court of Human Rights. Basically just saying you should just go to either leave it completely or remain where we are, but where we are with it is really, really bad. So why should we remain in it? And that is what they are trying to do. It's Euroscepticism focusing now on the European Court of Human Rights. However, I am glad he mentions this, though. So he says, the realities, of course, the Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement alone demand a pragmatic strategy. Mentioned it. Point for him for mentioning that, because that is right. A lot of people, when they bring this up, do not seem to realize how it is important to the Good Friday Agreement. do not seem to even recognize or respond to that at all. So good for you for bringing it up. However, even then, reforming it would probably be really hard as well. So, people should vote for us, he continues, because we are sensible, reliable, and conservative. This means being pragmatic. Some things reforms Eurosceptic fanatics have no interest in. They want to tear it all apart. They are radicals, not conservatives. Good luck trying to get that across, because you sort of did that with Brexit. There you go. You're not being pragmatic with Brexit. If you were pragmatic, you would have never proceeded to do Brexit, or you would have gone probably for the softest Brexit approach possible. Why not actually start to advocate to soften Brexit? Why not advocate for a rejoining the customs union, or rejoining customs union single market? That would be a pragmatic approach, but you're constrained by your own party's Euroscepticism. You have to fight them. I will say this to you now. You have to fight them. You have to have an absolute Royal Rumble. You have to go in there, and you have not to be afraid to get your hands dirty, because you're going to have to fight. If you want your party to be sane, rational, and sensible, again, you are going to have to fight your party. And that means going full root and stem reforms in your party. That is going to cause a lot of mess. Probably means you won't win the next couple of elections. But hey, if it means you can rebuild the party like that, that's what you're going to have to do. But no one's prepared in your side to actually really do that. So, in conclusion, it is important to stress that this article should not be seen as advocating a binary ideological shift. But that's what you're arguing for. Electoral politics requires compromise, which may, of course, include recognizing that there are still voters who will be won by reform. However, as a membership, this should not be an obsession when reality dictates that there is a safer, far more secure option to accept our position and, of course, focus on trying to win votes from Labour and the Liberal Democrats. After all, as Margaret Chase Smith put it, the right way is not always the popular and easy way. Standing for right when it is unpopular is a true test of moral character. And so far, you guys constantly fail that. You fail that constantly. You have caved. You have caved to so many things by your, fellow, right-wing travelers in your party. They've dragged you in that direction. You have not stood up to those things that are popular or unpopular to try and test that. There's a reason why you get called the wets by them, and it's the only thing I'll agree with them on. That you don't seem to have a spine, that you seem to fold at every single moment. But you are pretty much indicating what I've been saying for a while, that sooner or later there is going to be a right Royal Rumble in the Conservative Party for the fight for what it is, and it will probably be you guys versus whatever is on the right of your party. Because, oh boy, is that going to be interesting. But anyway, let's have a look at the comments. Not too surprising, all ripping into him. So you were talking, Gork is, of course, your standard bearer, but you do not represent the Conservative Party that I want to belong to. So, as I said, you've got to fight. Like I say, this guy is probably a member of the Conservative Party. How are you going to get him on board? Someone else comes up here. The intelligentsia have left the Conservative Party for good. All that remains is now a party for the unfielding scramble with reform of now the older, less educated voters. The party's impending demise may be seen as just punishment for inflicting Brexit and Johnson on the UK. Yep, this is interesting. So this one here. As for the Conservatives, they have lost direction since Johnson was removed and followed by a series of very unpopular leaders. Badenoch, of course, does not engage with voters and isn't suddenly going to. Nothing will improve for the Conservatives until they get a leader that the wide enough electorate can actually relate to. Cleverly would have been a good choice. Even Jerrick is better than Badenoch. Jerrick would not be doing as well as Badenoch either. He would probably be doing just as bad. Like, he would be doing just as bad. The idea that Jerrick would have been better than Badenoch is a balm for those Jerrick supporters because they lost to Badenoch and they can see how bad she's doing. If the reverse had happened, the exact same thing would be happening now. You will be seeing Badenoch supporters saying, "Oh, if only we had gone for Badenoch instead of Jerrick, how better things would be now." Yeah. And then someone likes a child writes and a boomer sneers. Yeah, neatly encapsulating why anyone barely notices under the age of 40 conservative voters. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Um, Someone else here. This idea, of course, trying to be a centrist party has been tried before. It fails to deliver a very comfortable majority of the try and the sort the Conservative Party enjoyed under Margaret Thatcher. If we continue to do that, we've just been what we've been doing is getting the same results we've been getting. But Margaret Thatcher dragged the party of the Conservatives into a more right-wing coalition. Like, she got a lot of the centrists. She got more votes because she dragged the party under that and understood that the party has to be a big tent. A lot of your problems, believe it or not, date back to Margaret Thatcher. But there you go. Someone else then replied to that. It delivered, of course, the coalition and, of course, the pre-Brexit Cameron ministry, both of which were an order of magnitude better, despite their flaws, of which then were followed. Hey, he's not wrong. The majorities, of course, of the Thatcher era are all gone. She was elected 45 years ago. There is a bigger gap than the one between then and the end of the war and her even election. Very true. Someone still says here, an article that may well speak for most of London, but not for the rest of the country. There are a lot more seats where reform vote split will the Conservatives than any other party, and it will cost us that seat. That's very true indeed. Someone else in response to that. We've been losing voters to the Lib Dems over the course of these 3 elections since Brexit. It is a long-term trend. This includes many of our traditional shires outside of London. Not all of the landed gentry and farmers were pro-hard Brexit. Ken, very true on that as well. Someone else having go in for being lead chair of the One Nation group. Again, I like this fact that they are blaming Sunak. That Sunak was the reason why they lost that general election. It wasn't Sunak that lost it. It was still the right wing that were in control of Sunak. So, someone brings it up here. Polling before the last year's election indicated that indicated that amongst the public perception, we're of course regarded as predominantly the party of the right. Only 7% deemed us left-leaning, but 6% placed us in the centre. We would be making the very same mistake as after 1997, dropping now to consider that recipe is only to turn to far more right-wing. Middle England wants a moderate, non-ideological government that works. They are only turning back to Labour after Starmer purged the ideological Corbynistas. So, yeah, there's not a lot of people that support him. Or if they did, there's very few of them. And I think it's a question of how much, even though they are, I would say, still probably the most influential group in the Conservative Party. But you've got to go to war, my friend. You've got to go to war with your party. sooner or later, you've got to realize, you've got to stand up there and you've got to say, this party is going in the wrong direction. And it is those guys' fault. It is these guys' because we followed this absolute terrible ideology. And you're going to find someone that's willing to risk it all for that. And not just once, maybe a couple of times. I would have said maybe Tom Tugendhat was that guy. But I'm not so sure after the last Conservative leadership election. But, you know, good luck on that. Good luck on that. Anyway, the fates and fortunes of the Conservative Party, always fun to watch because it's just it's never-ending spiral. Like I say, we're witnessing something we haven't probably seen for a very long time in UK politics, and that's the death, quite possibly, of a political party. Very interesting. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.